Hello and welcome to today's video, guys. In this video, we will be looking at the music industry. We'll be looking at how it's oversaturated, homogenized, and also causing listener fatigue. I want to explore whether music has lost its meaning in today's cultural industry. As always, thank you for stumbling upon this channel. It's amazing to see you here. Hi and welcome. But if you are a subscriber, then hi! Honestly, fit. It's time to jump into today's video and explore whether we're listening to new music or just the same thing formulated over and over. In today's mainstream music, something is missing. Despite the vastness of streaming libraries and the illusion of infinite choice, the landscape has become eerily repetitive. Tracks blend into one another. Innovation feels rare, and many listeners report growing tired, not of the music, but of how empty it has all begun to feel. This isn't just a subjective experience, it's the result of a broader industrial, technological, and cultural transformation. The music industry has become dominated by algorithms, branding logic, and economic pressures that favour sameness over something special. What once felt like art now feels like content, polished, optimised, and sometimes hollow. This video essay argues that mainstream music is experiencing an artistic decline, shaped by a system that prioritizes profit, algorithmic performance, and mass reproducibility over depth. Mainstream music today follows a really narrow and tight set of rules. As these artists function within the capitalist society, culture becomes industrialized. This pattern of repetitive structures and polished production closely aligns with what Adorno and Horkheimer's cultural industry theory suggested. They argued that in a capitalist society, culture becomes industrialized. Art is no longer created for its own sake, but mass-produced to serve economic goals. Two concepts define this shift: standardization, which in this case is the recycling of a familiar music pattern across songs, and pseudo-individualization, which is the illusion of difference created through superficial elements, such as the aesthetic, lyrics, or the voice of the artist. But the core formula remains unchanged. What sounds like variety is often just repetition in disguise. Empirical studies now back this up. Research shows that pop music has become less harmonically complex, more uniformed in tempo and timbre. It also became shorter in duration. Streaming platforms like Spotify reward songs that can hook early, fit algorithmic patterns, and retain listeners for monetization, further reinforcing the sameness of each song. And the result of this is a streamlined sonic production that performs well under commercial and digital pressures, but leaves many listeners experiencing noise fatigue, a growing disengagement triggered by the oversaturation of similar sounding songs, and emotionally flat content, especially when it comes to mainstream music. Songs are made with profitability in mind, and how much money they can make from each of these artists. Simon Firth, in his work on cultural industries, explains how music's value shifts when it becomes a commodity. That is, something created for sale rather than meaning. Under commodification, creativity takes a back seat. Artists are incentivized to chase trends rather than challenge them. Emotional or cultural depth is often sacrificed for virality. Streaming platforms also intensify this logic. Their algorithms boost songs that are short, repetitive, and easy to slot into the background. This creates a feedback loop. The more a track performs, the more visibility it gets, and the more it shapes the audience and what they hear. When music is treated just like another product, what matters is not what the song says, but how well it sells. Music used to be an experience. It lived in specific moments, places, and relationships. You discovered it on mixtapes, at a gig, through a scratched CD, or shared between friends. That emotional context gave it power. Today, music is everywhere, and also nowhere at the same time. Streaming has made songs instantly accessible, but increasingly disposable. They're algorithmically delivered, endlessly replayable, and barely tied to a physical or personal memory. Walter Benjamin's theory of mechanical reproduction helps explain what we've lost. He argued that when art is reproduced en masse, it loses its aura, its uniqueness, its authenticity, and original context. In the streaming era, that aura fades completely. Songs are flattened into data, stripped of intimacy and permanence. They're consumed passively, often in the background, and not a lived experience. Over time, this erodes our emotional connection with music. Even as we listen more, we actually feel less. Since the 1980s, especially with the rise of music videos, success in mainstream music has become increasingly tied to how well an artist can function as a brand. Visual identity, personality, and storytelling are carefully crafted to maximize commercial appeal, often overshadowing the qualities or originality of the music itself. In this system, the artist becomes a product, the persona packaged, promoted, and optimized for profit across platforms. This shift has only intensified in the digital age, where an artist's visibility and virality often matters more than their sound. As a result, the music landscape feels increasingly oversaturated and stylistically homogenized. This dynamic reflects a core idea from Adorno and Horkheimer's cultural industry theory that mass-produced cultural products like pop music are designed to be predictable and easily consumed, stripping away uniqueness in favor of what sells. Creativity becomes secondary to commercial strategy, and music loses much of its original function as a space for genuine artistic expression. So if the industrialization of music has formulated how music should be created, streaming platforms have turbocharged this. Their algorithms are built to know what sells best and what can be commercialized. And this is where a significant part of listener fatigue comes from. Elie Parise's concept of the filter bubble originally described how algorithms create echo chambers in political media, insulating users from opposing views. This logic applies equally to musical taste. Streaming algorithms tailor recommendations based on past behavior, continually feeding listeners variations of what they've already enjoyed. While this feels convenient, it quietly narrows exposure and limits exploration, boxing users into an increasingly predictable soundscape. Novelty and experimentation are sidelined because the algorithm optimizes engagement metrics such as plays, skips, and shares. They rather this over a creative risk. For artists, this creates pressures to conform to these algorithmic preferences, or they risk invisibility. The result is a music ecosystem where diversity shrinks and sameness is amplified, producing not just uniform sound, but uniform taste. And that's where the problem lies. Beneath algorithmic curation lies surveillance capitalism, the commodification of user data to predict and shape behavior. Every user interaction on Spotify or TikTok, from skipping a song to adding a track to a playlist, generates data that feeds the platform's predictive engines. This data doesn't just influence what listeners see, it shapes what artists create. Producers and songwriters craft music to tick algorithmic boxes, short intros, immediate hooks, specific tempos. Creative decisions become increasingly performed by streaming metrics rather than artistic vision. There is now concrete evidence to this. Spotify's most streamed songs cluster tightly between 100 and 120 beats per minute, creating rhythmic uniformity across its hits. The long-running loudness war escalates in this streaming age too, with tracks compressed to sound consistently loud and grab immediate attention. But they flatten the emotional nuances, and the once varied harmonic palette has contracted. Familiar progressions dominate music because they are algorithmically safe and easy to digest. This data confirms what the theories predict. The music optimized for streaming is less complex, less dynamic, and formulaic, all in service to maximize plays rather than artistic depth. One of the biggest reasons why everyone listens to music is because it makes you feel something. Music's power to move us is closely tied to dopamine, the brain's chemical messenger associated with pleasure and motivation. Research shows that dopamine peaks during moments of musical anticipation and emotional surprise, when a melody twists unexpectedly or a chorus hits just right. But this dopamine response depends on novelty and variation. When music becomes overly repetitive and formulaic, the brain's reward system tires, and the emotional impact of music dulls. This neurological burnout explains why so many listeners report that new music doesn't hit the same anymore. This phenomenon aligns with habituation theory, where repeat exposure to the same stimulus gradually reduces the brain's response. Formulaic songs relying heavily on predictability in hooks and structures quickly lose their emotional pull. as listeners become neurologically accustomed to them. Habituation fuels boredom and disengagement, reinforcing the fatigue caused by today's music echo chambers. Instead of feeling refreshed by discovery, listeners are trapped in a cycle of sameness that numbs rather than excites. Psychoacoustic research further highlights a related problem: noise fatigue. A sensory overload caused by constant exposure to repetitive or compressed sounds. Over-compressed tracks with little dynamic variation can impair cognitive function, reduce attention spans, and elevate stress levels. In an era flooded with music that sounds increasingly similar in tempo, dynamic and harmonic expression, and harmonic progression, listeners face an exhausting barrage rather than a rich auditory experience. Paradoxically, the abundance of music, once a sign of creative freedom, now contributes to the declining satisfaction and engagement. Playlists frequently feel stale despite constant updates. Because of algorithmic prioritization, fresh or experimental music struggles for visibility, further intensifying the listener's sense of fatigue and the perception that nothing truly new breaks through. The algorithmic sameness and listener fatigue doesn't just happen by accident. Behind this homogenization of music lies the industry's tool in making it: engineered artists, or in other words, industry plants. An industry plant is an artist marketed as organic or independently discovered, but who is in fact secretly developed and heavily backed by major labels or influential industry players from early in their careers. While the term does carry negative connotations implying deception or inauthenticity, the boundary between genuine discovery and label engineering is often blurred in today's music business. Industry plants benefit from substantial resources, targeted promotion, and strategic positioning that many truly independent artists lack, giving them a significant advantage in an already crowded marketplace. These advantages make it easier for engineered acts to dominate algorithmic-driven platforms. Artists like Lil Nas X, The Kid Laroi, and Olivia Rodrigo exemplify this phenomenon. Each possess undeniable talent and appeal, but their rapid rise, polished aesthetic, and tightly controlled media narratives raise questions. This does not dismiss their artistry, but rather acknowledges how industry mechanisms craft perception and sonic identity in aligning with commercial demands and algorithmic success. In contrast, genuinely independent artists such as Paris, Bobby Raps, and Grimes in her early career demonstrate a different path. These musicians maintain distinctive sonic identities that challenge mainstream norms, often favouring experimental production, diverse influence, and deeply personal storytelling. Their success stories illustrate an alternative route, one less engineered, more artistically authentic, and often more difficult to break into within today's industry landscape. This divide highlights how systematic industry practices can shape not only what music reaches audiences, but also what counts as authentic in the public eye, further reinforcing the echo chamber of sameness. The modern mainstream music system punishes risk-taking and rewards what will sell. In stark contrast to today's formulaic mainstream music, late 20th century artists such as Kate Bush, R.E.M., The Smiths, and experimental acts like Flock of Seagulls embodied true innovation. These artists consciously subverted established musical norms, blending genres, employing unconventional instrumental techniques, and challenging lyrical conventions. By taking bold experimental risks, they expanded popular music's sonic palette, fostering diversity and experimentation that pushed beyond the constraints of mass market formulas now dominant in the industry today. However, since 2010, the emergence of genuinely new genres has slowed dramatically. This shift reflects the growing influence of digital streaming platforms, whose algorithmic logic prioritizes listener retention over novelty. Platforms like Spotify and Apple Music use data-driven recommendation systems that create feedback loops reinforcing predictable sounds. Artists face immense pressure to conform to the narrow sonic parameters, designed to secure playlist placement and viral success. This trend is exemplified by commercially successful artists such as Lil Uzi Vert, Justin Bieber, Ed Sheeran, and Lil Tecca, whose music often follows formulaic patterns, repetitive choruses, tempo clusters near 120 BPM, and hooks engineered for TikTok virality. From a political economic perspective, David Hesmondall's analysis highlights how the industry commodifies artists as brands, prioritizing marketability over genuine creative risk-taking. The commodification perpetuates replication rather than innovation, favouring tracks that fit templates instead of pushing boundaries, with commercial focus increasingly concentrated on a small set of dominant genres like pop, hip-hop, and trap. Further supporting this, comparative research between Spotify's most streamed tracks and critical reviews on platforms such as Metacritic and Pitchfork reveals striking disparities. The songs achieving massive streaming numbers frequently receive lukewarm or even negative critical evaluations. This gap between algorithmic popularity and artistic merit echoes the critique of the cultural industry, where mass-produced cultural goods prioritize standardization and pseudo-individuality, creating the illusion of uniqueness while being structurally the same underneath. In this environment, innovation is not only discouraged, but actively penalized as a system optimized for predictability and repetition. The combined forces of algorithmic curation, economic incentives, and industry commodification have created a cultural ecosystem that rewards imitation and punishes experimentation. Alternative music platforms like Bandcamp and Patreon help independent artists make it on their own. Free from the demands of playlist virality and corporate gatekeepers, these platforms foster community-driven ecosystems where artists connect directly with their audiences. Success here is not measured by passive clicks or fleeting trends, but by active engagement and meaningful financial support from dedicated listeners. This growth of decentralized scenes represent a quiet rebellion, a space for individuality, experimentation, and sonic risk. Technological advances have radically lowered barriers to create music. Affordable digital audio workstations, mobile apps, and open source tools empower anyone with a laptop. This fuels a creative explosion beneath the surface of mainstream music. Bedroom producers, garage bands, and community studios crafting unique sounds unhindered by commercial polish. Online tutorials and collaborative forums accelerate skill sharing and experimentation, weakening traditional gatekeepers and reaffirming that creativity thrives where curiosity, effort, and vision lead. And that's what originally made artists so integral to the cultural and creative industry. They brought expression, they brought art, and they brought meaning. Thank you so much for watching today's video, guys. It does mean a lot that you've made it all this way. If you have enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a like and also consider subscribing if you've enjoyed it. How can you not? Leave a comment in the comment section below about your thoughts on the music industry and what you think is good and bad. As always, guys, thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.